3,000 years ago, a man won a war with a wooden horse, and then lost the next 10 years because he couldn't resist bragging about it. This is the Odyssey, and most people think it's a story about monsters. It's actually a story about ego, and how one man's pride turned a 2-week sail home into the worst road trip in ancient history. 10 years earlier, the Greeks had been camped outside Troy, stuck. The walls wouldn't fall and the Trojans wouldn't come out. So Odysseus, the cleverest man in the Greek army, came up with the plan that would make him famous forever. Build a giant wooden horse, hide soldiers inside, leave it as a gift, and let the Trojans do the rest. They did. That night the hidden Greeks climbed out, opened the gates, and burned Troy to the ground. War over. Odysseus was a legend. Now all he had to do was sail home to his wife Penelope and his son Telemachus, waiting on the island of Ithaca. Should have taken 2 weeks. It took 10 years. First stop, the land of the Cicons. Odysseus and his men raided the city, grabbed the wine, and Odysseus told everyone to get back on the ships immediately. Naturally, nobody listened. They partied on the beach all night instead. By morning, Cicon reinforcements arrived and killed 72 of his men. Day 1 of the trip home, and he's already burying soldiers. A storm then blew them off course for 9 days, dumping them on the island of the Lotus Eaters, where the local fruit makes you forget your entire life. 3 of his men ate it and had to be dragged back to the ships, weeping, with no memory of home at all. Bad, but not the worst stop. That one's next. They landed on the island of the Cyclops, and Odysseus, instead of grabbing supplies and leaving, which is what his men wanted, decided he wanted to meet whoever lived in the massive cave full of cheese and livestock they'd found. Curiosity is a hell of a drug. The owner turned out to be Polyphemus, a one-eyed giant and the son of Poseidon, god of the sea. Worst possible parentage for the monster you're about to make an enemy of. Polyphemus sealed the cave with a boulder so heavy that 22 wagons couldn't have moved it. Trapped, he grabbed 2 of Odysseus's men and ate them raw. Then 2 more the next morning. Odysseus couldn't kill him outright. Nobody else could move that boulder either. So instead, he got the giant drunk and told him his name was Nobody. When Odysseus drove a heated stake into the giant's one eye, Polyphemus screamed for help. The other Cyclops came running. "What's wrong? Who's hurting you?" "Nobody," he groaned. "Nobody is hurting me." So they shrugged and went back to bed. Genuinely one of the best tricks in all of Greek mythology. In the morning, blind Polyphemus felt the back of every sheep leaving the cave, checking for riders. Odysseus's men strapped themselves to the underside of the sheep instead and slipped out untouched. Clean escape. Poseidon would never even have known who did it. But Odysseus couldn't let it go. As his ship pulled away, he stood up and shouted back across the water, "If anyone asks who blinded you, tell them it was Odysseus, son of Laertes." Next, the island of Aeolus, keeper of the winds. Aeolus actually liked Odysseus. He sealed every dangerous wind inside a leather bag and gifted him one gentle breeze to sail straight home on. For 9 days it worked perfectly. On the 10th day, Ithaca appeared on the horizon. Odysseus could see smoke rising from his own island's chimneys, and then, exhausted, he fell asleep. His crew had been staring at that bag for 9 days, convinced it was hidden treasure he wasn't sharing. The second he closed his eyes, they opened it. Every trapped storm exploded out at once, blasting all 12 ships backward across the sea, in sight of home one moment, further away than ever the next. Aeolus refused to help a second time. "The gods clearly hate you. Get off my island." It got worse. The Laestrygonians, a nation of giants, hurled boulders down from the cliffs onto the fleet in their harbor, spearing the crews like fish. 11 of 12 ships destroyed in minutes. Only Odysseus's ship survived, because he docked outside the harbor instead of inside it. 12 ships were now won. Hundreds of men were now a few dozen, and they hadn't even reached the halfway point. They washed up next on the island of Aea, home of the witch goddess Circe. Odysseus sent a scouting party ahead. Circe welcomed them with a feast, then touched each man with her wand and turned every single one of them into a pig. Snouts, hooves, all of it. Odysseus went in alone to get his men back. The god Hermes gave him a protective herb that blocked Circe's magic, and when her spell failed on him, she turned his men back and invited everyone to stay. They stayed a year, a full year on a magical island, while Penelope sat at home not knowing if her husband was alive or dead. Eventually, it was his own crew who had to remind him, "Sir, are we ever going home?" "Right, home. Let's do that." Circe told him there was one stop first, the land of the dead, to consult the prophet Tiresias. Odysseus sailed to the edge of the known world, dug a pit, filled it with blood, and summoned the dead. Tiresias gave him one warning, and only one: do not touch the cattle of the sun god Helios. If you do, you lose everything. While he was there, Odysseus saw his own mother among the dead. She had died of grief, waiting for a son who never came home. He reached for her 3 times. 3 times she slipped through his arms like smoke. That's the cost of 10 extra years, measured in a single scene. One mother who didn't live to see the end of the story he was still busy starring in. He sailed on into the most dangerous water in the ancient world. First, the sirens, whose song lures sailors to wreck themselves on the rocks. Odysseus plugged his crew's ears with wax and had himself tied to the mast, so he alone could hear the song without being able to steer toward it. It worked exactly as planned, though he did scream at them to untie him halfway through. They didn't. Next, Scylla and Charybdis, a 6-headed monster on one side, a ship-swallowing whirlpool on the other. No safe path existed. Odysseus chose Scylla, 6 men lost instead of the whole ship, and watched her snatch 6 sailors, who screamed his name as she ate them alive. And then Thrinacia, the island Tiresias had specifically warned him about, home of Helios's sacred cattle. Odysseus told his men again not to touch them, but bad winds trapped them there for a month, and the food ran out. While he slept, his starving crew slaughtered the cattle anyway. The gods can punish us later. We're starving now. When Odysseus woke to the smell of roasting beef, he knew exactly what it meant. The moment they set sail, Zeus split the ship in half with a single thunderbolt. Every man drowned, every single one. Odysseus alone survived, clinging to wreckage, and washed up on the island of Ogygia, home of the goddess Calypso. She fell in love with him, offered him immortality if he'd stay forever. He said no, and spent 7 years sitting on that beach, staring at the horizon, grieving a home he couldn't reach. Eventually, Athena convinced Zeus to intervene, and Calypso was ordered to let him go grudgingly and without a ship. Odysseus built a raft himself and sailed for 17 days, until Poseidon spotted him and smashed it apart. Not done with him yet. He washed up on Phaeacia, where the king heard his story and finally gave him a real ship home. He woke up on the beach of Ithaca 20 years after he'd left. And Ithaca was a disaster. Over 100 suitors had moved into his palace, eating his food, drinking his wine, and pressuring Penelope to remarry, certain Odysseus was dead. Penelope had been stalling them for years with one of the great delay tactics in all of literature. She'd weave a burial shroud by day for Odysseus's elderly father, and secretly unravel it every night, buying herself 3 extra years before a servant finally gave her away. Athena disguised Odysseus as an old beggar so he could walk back into his own home unrecognized. At the gate, an old dog lying in a pile of manure lifted its head. It was Argus, the puppy Odysseus had raised 20 years earlier. The dog's tail thumped once, its ears dropped, and it died, having waited 2 decades just to see him one more time. Inside, the suitors mocked the beggar, threw food and even a stool at him. He took every bit of it, watching, counting, waiting. Penelope announced a contest. Whoever could string Odysseus's old bow and shoot an arrow clean through 12 axe heads in a row would win her hand. Suitor after suitor failed to so much as bend it. Then the old beggar asked for a turn. They laughed right up until he strung the bow like it weighed nothing and put an arrow through all 12 axes in one shot. Then he turned the bow on them. He and Telemachus killed all of the suitors in the great hall that day. Even after that, Penelope wasn't convinced. 20 years is a long time to be fooled. So she gave him one final, quiet test. She ordered a servant to move the king's bed out of their bedroom for their guest. Odysseus immediately objected. That bed couldn't be moved. He'd built it himself around a living olive tree. One of the bedposts was the tree itself, still rooted in the ground. Nobody alive knew that but the two of them. That was the answer only the real Odysseus could give. Penelope broke. 20 years, 2 wars, a god's curse, a six-headed monster, a witch, a decade of strangers eating him out of house and home, and it all came down to a man remembering how he'd built his own bed. The Odyssey is almost 3,000 years old, and it's still teaching the same lesson it started with. The smartest person in the room can still be the dumbest person in the room if he can't control his ego. Odysseus outsmarted a Cyclops, survived the sirens, walked into the land of the dead and back out again. But it took him 10 years to learn the one thing he should have known from the start. Sometimes the